Hi, I'm Nikki Foley, and welcome to our second quarter of 2026 webinar. The title and the topic today is From Paycheck to Portfolio, Building Wealth in the Accumulation Phase of Retirement Planning. Again, Nikki Foley from Paladin Financial, and I'm joined by Ellie Robison of Paladin as well. Thanks for joining us, Ellie. Excited to do this project with you and to share the screen with you today.
Thank you, Nikki. I always like recording with you. I have so much fun with the podcast. So I'm excited to do a webinar with you for the first time ever.
Let's get started today. If you want to go ahead and go to the next screen, our topic today is about the accumulation phase of retirement. But what I want to take a moment to do before we get into that is talk a little bit about what retirement planning is. And I think one of the key things that I felt early on in my career that retirement planning was really addressing those that were entering retirement maybe a couple years before. But what I found over time that retirement planning really is a continuous and evolving process, that the years leading up to retirement certainly doesn't mean just those couple years before you make that decision. It stretches much further than that. And so today that really is our focus. And on the next slide, Ellie is going to talk just a little bit more about what that life cycle looks like.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about the accumulation phase within the retirement plan. One little story that I have for you, Nikki, and I think I just shared this around the office recently, but one thing that motivated me to get into this industry in the first place was watching my dad enter into retirement. He was laid off in the 2008 crisis and he was 60 years old. And he was someone who set himself up appropriately. And even with a layoff at 60, and it was before he was planning on truly retiring, he said, I don't want to go back to work because he didn't have to, because he set up his retirement plan appropriately where he had the flexibility to walk away. So when we talk about the wealth accumulation phase of life, one thing that I wanted to put a visual to is it is a consistent life cycle of constant moving parts from when you start working through your life expectancy. So in this visual here, talking through the life cycle approach, that you have that asset accumulation phase that begins with essentially the start of your career at age 20. And usually that time period can be looked at from your early 20s to your mid 50s. And that's just, a rough time horizon. Your next phase of life overlaps with that. Specifically, it can start in your early 30s through your early 70s. That is going to be focusing on conservation and risk management. But as you see in that overlap, it's still focusing within your accumulation phase of life. And then as you get into your later part of your career, where you're maybe in your mid 40s, that's where you can start focusing on a chunk of your retirement planning intended for your distribution and gifting phase of your life. So this is very intentional where you see this overlap throughout your life expectancy, that you're going to be focusing on multiple things at once as your retirement plan gets a little bit more complex over time. So risks and goals that we are strictly focusing on throughout your, working careers. Risks can be untimely death, disability, health problems, unemployment, loss of property, while goals, these are things that we like to focus on with our clients is, financial security and education funding for maybe kids or grandkids someday, lump sum expenses that might pop up, which you can ultimately tie into goals of maybe some dreams that you have down the road, and then legacy goals, which usually pops up later on in life.
That was a fantastic visual, and it really helped bring things to life when you think about what life does look like. And that retirement planning really does start as soon as you have your career. And it's no surprise when you actually put some practical thoughts to it that what is one of the first accounts that you open when you start your career? Typically a 401k. That is a retirement plan. And so sometimes, though, when you think and hear retirement planning, it seems so far off, where reality is you're living it every day. So thanks for sharing that visual. One of the other things that I find that we are hearing a lot about right now in our industry is about your vision or your goals. And it's showing up in, podcasts and conversations with industry leaders. It's showing up in classroom work that both Ellie and I have recently been in the classroom educating everybody from seniors all the way on up to age 50 plus. And one of the things that starts, no matter what age we're talking about, is making sure that you have a vision for what your goals look like. And usually, when a financial planner or a financial advisor is asking you that, your mind instantly latches on to finance. But the reality is, it doesn't really matter what category that you're talking about. You are making goals in each one of those. And most of the time, they tie back to ultimately a financial decision as well. And so, taking that one step further, and if you want to go to the next slide there, Ellie, is as you're making those goals, simultaneously, you're caught up in the situation of where you are earning income and you are in a phase where you are also spending. And each time you make a decision to spend, you are going to potentially dip into that additional income you're making. And so, Ellie, I'm going to pass this slide off to you and let you talk about it in a little bit more detail. And then we're going to come back to that concept of goals don't necessarily mean financial goals, but it's all goals that should be on the table. And then how do we tie those back to finance?
Yeah. Nikki, I like to coin myself as a dreamer when I am talking to prospective clients in a first or and second appointment. I really push our clients to have some type of goal throughout their life that they want to hit. And I always emphasize on it doesn't have to be something that you know right this second is going to happen 20 years down the road. I think a lot of 45-year-old, 55-year-olds still don't really know what their retirement's going to look like, but you need to start thinking through what might possibly pop up in the future. For example, is there any type of gleam of you maybe wanting a condo in Florida in retirement? Is there any possibility of wanting a cabin up north? And really putting a vision behind your goals and ultimately for that retirement lifestyle that you are going to enter into at some point in the future. So having that vision and ironing that out is crucial number one step goal of what are we doing here with your money and making sure that we try to avoid this lifestyle inflation creep and putting your money to work for that future vision that we have created together. And then step two is really having a system that helps combat the lifestyle inflation that naturally happens to a lot of people when they are not ironing out their goals specifically. So I think an easy example would be every time that you get a increase at work, instead of pocketing that extra money that's coming to your bank account with every paycheck, maybe increasing your 401k contribution. And it doesn't even feel like you have a raise at that point, but you're putting that dollar away for your future self down the road.
So back to that concept of starting with the vision, and Ellie has done a nice job of tying it back to where do you want to go in retirement? I'll be honest, and I don't know that I've told this story on the stage before, maybe a little bit, but my daughter, when she was in pre-K, so this is rewind a couple years, she did a poster board that indicated what she wanted to do when she grows up. And she put down that she wanted to own a donut shop. Little did she know that I also want to own a donut shop. My grandpa owned a donut shop, and it has always been on my bucket list. Well, I mean, she is now 7, like time is flying. Like that really could be, if we wanted to bring that to life, that could be a 10 to 12 to 15-year decision. Well, when you start to get into your smart decision or your smart goals, you get to have a little bit more specific than let that just be a goal. And so while that is not necessarily a financial goal, if on the surface, but once you start getting into the specific, the measurable, is it aligning with other people in our family? Is it realistic in the timeline? You find you need potentially those full 10 years to make sure you're set and ready to go. So if you go to the next slide, Ellie, when you're talking about making a SMART goal, the whole point is let's get really real about what this looks like and specific. And so in the example here, I didn't use the donut shop. We tailored it a little bit more towards having a second home and making that something that might be on the retirement list. But as you can see, when you get to the measurable, just the second step in, you have a really good checks and balances of, can I truly put away $2,000 to $4,000 additional per month to bring this to life? And so I think that oftentimes we have our bucket list and we have the fantastic thoughts out there, but one, we don't tie it back to financial, and two, we don't get as specific and measurable as we might need to do. And you think about the donut shop. Jeff has heard us, my husband Jeff and I work together here at Paladin. You know, he's heard us say it over and over, but do I really have his buy-in? I'm not quite sure that we've actually had real conversations. And so I think at the start of this conversation in any phase of life, whether you're in accumulation or we're starting to get into the other phases that Ellie had previously showed us, like this is a action or a starting point for every conversation, no matter what phase that you're in. So with that, Ellie, if you want to go to the next slide, I think this was one that it brings it down to the basics. And Ellie and I got a good chuckle out of this when we were planning for our conversation about how we each feel about cash flow, net worth, and ultimately a budget. So Ellie, take it away on what you do on a regular basis as it relates to a budget, and then I'll share how I feel about a budget.
Yeah, I mean, I have always been diligent in my personal life with updating my monthly budget and my monthly net worth. On the first of every month, I look at my spreadsheet and I say, did I hit my goals for the month? What did I miss? What do I need to adjust? And honestly, I'm looking at everything on an annual basis. It also ties into, in our SMART goals here, specifically with the measurable aspect, doing some reflection. And the reason why I love having everything in spreadsheets is I can go to a year, back. So back to April 2025, and I get to see all of the growth that I have achieved personally by all of the monthly intentions I have made over the last year. So I am very diligent with my net cash flow, with money coming in, money going out, and what am I trying to do with everything in between.
And Ali, I'll compliment you there for a second. I don't think even you meant to communicate this, but what you have been doing as you do that is celebrating the gains along the way. And so this hopefully has been a positive experience, and you want to keep coming back to it because of that. You can look back and celebrate. I, on the other hand, find that budgets and constraint, it feels like, do not tell me what to do, don't control me. And so that's a whole nother side of it that is true human nature, is don't tell me what to do and don't control me. And so to zoom out just a little bit and use the acronym KISS, keep it simple, stupid, is it really does come down to two pieces of information. Is how is your net cash flow? Is it positive? So all cash coming in and all cash going out. What does it look like at the end of the day? So this is how hard you're rowing or how hard you're working. And then your net worth is ultimately confirming your progress. So it's looking at what are the assets and what are they tallying to, minus your liabilities is ultimately your net worth. And so no matter how you approach this, whether you look a little more like Ellie and are diligent and can celebrate the successes along the way or note some of the opportunities, or you're like me, don't tell me what to do. Either one, this whole concept of net cash flow and net worth is the starting point for any piece of this. And it is also empowers you to work through your SMART goals, because at the end of the day what it looks like from a net worth perspective, and also how your net cash flow looks, and if you have an opportunity or need to make changes to fuel the opportunities that you're setting for yourself or the goals you're setting for yourself. Ellie, is there anything you want to add to that?
Not necessarily. I think it's a perfect segue to really talk about this next slide here on the definition of wealth and defining wealth. I think a big misconception of when we're talking about the wealth accumulation phase and trying to build up your assets over time, like we're not talking about building up $10 million. Like it doesn't necessarily need to be that. What we're focusing on for people who are still in that accumulation phase is, the growth that we are getting through investments, real estate, potential businesses that appreciate over time. I think that's pretty intuitive. I think a lot of our listeners already know that, along with passive income, whether it is money that is compounding through your investments or it's something that is generating cash flow to you, like real estate income through a real estate property, whatever it is, the whole goal is financial freedom, which is retirement, right? And so I think a lot of people are tying retirement to a specific age where, okay, well, I need to, I need to work until age 67 in order to retire. That's not necessarily the goal. The goal is for you to build up enough assets so you can maintain the lifestyle that you ultimately want. So you can be retiring at 55 and maybe it's only $1 million that you need, or maybe you do need $6 million at age 70 because you are planning on living a very long and active lifestyle. It is completely unique for every single listener out there. So that's what we're really focusing on, is that financial freedom goal for everyone.
And Ellie, we're going to take him through an example as we get closer to the end. Is, you're talking about your asset bucket, but you also have to remember the role of Social Security and then figuring out, is there a gap? And so we'll walk through that towards the end.
Oh, yeah. This is a visual that we, are not shy of. It's something that I think a lot of our listeners are also aware of, is just the power of time and just making sure that we're investing early and regularly. In this visual, Bob's hypothetical of a $50,000 initial investment and contributing an extra $1,000 a month will show a significant compound interest over the course of 30 years, as opposed to just a 10-year chunk of investment, goals. So making sure that we are investing consistently throughout your life to make sure that we hit these goals over time is going to be crucial.
And as Ellie said, that's one of the basic concepts that's out there. And so if anything, if you take only 1, 2, or 3 things away from the conversation today, that's probably one that but also making sure if you have an opportunity to influence others around you, it's probably one of the more basic and common principles that you can share in an easy manner, is start early and be consistent along the way. This slide brings a whole lot to the table here, and I want to take it, try to make it as basic as possible. Ellie, I think you were going to start with some of the examples, and then I'll wrap up the conversation on this slide.
Yeah. This is a slightly newer visual that we have been, showing a lot of our clients here at Paladin. And one thing that I like to emphasize is sometimes I see high earners come through our doors and they're very good at saving, but through a series of micro mistakes they've made over time has cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so some of these examples on the outside of our financial plan, tax plan, health plan, and estate plan, these are some common, mistakes that people aren't maybe really thinking through when they are shoving money into their investments. For example, I had a slightly newer client come through my door within the last year or so, and they are in their later career, and they are making the most amount of money they've ever made. They are making, 400,000, let's say. All of the assets that they have built up thus far is all pre-tax assets, where if we would have been more mindful of where we were putting those type of investment contributions in their earlier career, I wish they would have built up some Roth assets first, and now would be contributing to pre-tax accounts to help lower their taxable income at this point. So for instance, like, that is an easy example that I can think of off the top of my head of why we want to be consistently planning throughout your entire life for retirement.
Ellie, you brought up your dad at the beginning of this conversation and how he had the ability to retire in 2008 when others may have been worrying about their accounts going down dramatically and having to postpone their retirement decision. I'm going to give an example here of somebody that I'm working with also that went through that scenario, and her response was fear of being in the market from then on out, and her decisions ultimately led her to be very conservative for the last, almost 20 years at this point. So as she's preparing for retirement, she has more sitting in cash than she does in retirement accounts, and she is not keeping up with inflation. So she has inflation risk that has been spanning almost 20 years. And so we had to have a real conversation about how do we address the next, 5, 10 to 15 years of her retirement or leading up to retirement, and what does that gap look like for her. And so again, back to just a couple of the things that happen, it's whatever lens that you are looking through, you may not realize what is happening alongside of you, and then it shows up 15 or 20 years later. If you look at a lot of the pieces that are on here, they tie back to the tax conversation. And that is one where people oftentimes start to get a little bit uncomfortable and recognize they don't necessarily understand all the options that might be available out there to them, and what might be some of the barriers that tie back to taxes along the way that might prevent them to really be maximizing that wealth accumulation phase. So with that, if anything that you're seeing on here, we are kind of our overall picture is recognizing that as you encounter things, you may not know, but ultimately, if you have a plan in place, a financial plan, a tax plan, a health plan, an estate plan, you're going to have likelihood that you have tackled more than you maybe even realize that you have tackled because you have a plan, and then bringing in the right professionals along the way to make sure that you're maximizing potentially the tax credits and deductions that are available to you and any adjustments or whatever it might be, such as a Roth conversion, a home purchase, and so forth. And so with that in mind, while this might seem like a very complicated slide, and I don't know what I don't know, again, zooming out, trying to make sure that you recognize putting a plan and having the right professionals around you to guide you is part of the decision-making process as well.
This is a slide here that directly, recaps everything that we've said thus far and putting it into an easy 5-step paycheck to portfolio system. So creating positive net worth or net cash flow, step 1, step 2, ensure your savings allocations are going into the right places that you need it to go, your emergency savings, your employer match, any additional investment opportunities that you put your money into, automating your cash flow. And then step 4 and 5 is directly tying into what Nikki's talking about with that previous page, is making sure that we're diversifying our assets appropriately. And then the continuous monitoring, like you had said, Nikki, the tax portion of your retirement plan, there's a lot of complexity with that. So we need to consistently address the tax planning within our clients' investment portfolios and making sure that we are reallocating to make sure that it's matching up with what their goals are over time.
So Ellie, one of the first things that I heard you say early in our conversation is A, let's make sure that we have a vision so that we know where we're going. And B, let's put ourselves on a system so that we know that we're being consistent and we're tackling things. And what you've just delivered here might seem really basic and might seem obvious along the way, but with each step, there's a lot of decisions that are happening, and making sure, just putting this in motion is A, you're going to tackle part of it, but the more that you really dig in each one of these and understand and potentially work with the professionals and have the plan in place, the more that you're going to cover and the richer that your benefits are going to be along the way.
Absolutely. So then why does this conversation matter? Well, people may earn an income throughout their lives, but fail to actually build wealth if they're not intentional with their money. Retirement success is not built at the finish line. It's built during all the stages of your career. And then that small disciplined decisions every day, lead up to those exponentially different outcomes decades from now, essentially. So with that, I will let Nikki kind of talk through our next phase here.
So a lot of what we have covered, as Ellie positioned us at the beginning, really covers multiple phases. And ultimately, where we're going with all of this is getting you into the wealth distribution phase and doing that with confidence. It gets more complicated, though, as you move into this wealth distribution phase. And some of the things that are out there, as you're planning to go from accumulation to distribution, there's a need for advice and bringing in opinions from, knowledge leaders, experts, people that are professionals in some of the key areas. And so when you go from that accumulation phase, you really have one big goal in mind is accumulation. Yes, you may have smaller goals that you're making along the way with those SMART goals of whatever it might look like, whether it's a house in Tahoe, it's a donut shop, or just being able to retire at 60 if that's what presents itself. But as you start to get into that distribution phase, one, there's still a need for savings for retirement. And while you may be moving past that, it's making sure that you have a good understanding of your expenses. I would say that's probably one of the number one things that we hear when we first start working with prospective clients is they think they know what their expenses are. And when they start actually having to put that into true application, they find that they might be spending more than they actually realize. And I would say that Ellie sees that, all of us see that in some capacity, that there is a mismatch on what people think their expenses might be. Then moving your investment strategy into this new phase with you from accumulation to distribution, that might look a little bit different when you're starting to use those assets to actually pay yourself income along the way. Having that savings withdrawal plan, the Social Security decisions, the unexpected event planning when you are on a fixed income, the Medicare, and even debt management as you're living on a fixed income. And so you can see that there's a multitude of financial choices, and sometimes these are irreversible decisions. Undoing a Social Security decision or a Medicare decision isn't always the easiest thing to do. Undoing a decision, an IRS decision, also potentially an irreversible decision. And so there are risks that go along with this on top of the already uncertainty of we don't know how long we're going to live. So even if you have a life expectancy that you are planning for, oftentimes you may have family history and so forth that stretches those numbers beyond what you were expecting. And so we share all of this as you're moving from the accumulation to the distribution phase, it gets more complicated. But the same survey indicated that only 1/3 of people in the 50 to 74 age range are currently working with a financial advisor. And so introducing the concept of a professional as you start to move into this closer to retirement becomes even more important because of the financial choices and the irreversible decisions and so forth. Ellie, let's talk a little bit more about what spending looks like in distribution and why this foundation is so important that we've been talking about up to this point.
So I think it's important to talk through what retirement might actually look like because a lot of times, you sit down with pre-retirees and they say, "Oh, well, my expenses are going to go down. The mortgage is going to get paid off. I don't really like to travel or whatnot." But a lot of times when you enter into retirement, a lot of our retirees have this newfound sense of freedom and they are taking advantage of this time and, onboarding new hobbies into their life. They are taking on more travel than they anticipated. Like they are busy individuals. And so we don't like to show that there's a drop of expenses in retirement based off of debt that might be paid off. A lot of times they maintain that type of expense. And if anything, there might be an added expense as you enter into your early phase of retirement. At some point later on in retirement, in the most ginger way I can put it, there is a slowdown of years. Sometimes I see this in the later 70s where people get a little bit slower, they get tired, they might not want to be hopping on a plane to Japan, and so there does seem to be a slight, decrease in active lifestyle in that phase of retirement. However, then there tends to be another bump of increase of expenses in those no-go years where there's a lot of healthcare expenses that start to pop up. And this usually alludes to long-term care. It's a conversation that we like to wrap into all of our retirement planning with all of our clients once we get them into the retirement phase of life, because as you know, especially Nikki, you work in the Medicare space, but the average inflation rate with, just everything in general is between 2 to 3%. But when it comes to healthcare inflation, that is an average of 5 to 6%, if not more. And so knowing that there might be a higher cost of that type of end of life expense coming down the pipeline is very real for a lot of people. Is there
So
anything that
Ellie,
you'd like to add to that, Nikki?
no, absolutely. You've done a great job on explaining that. And I think as you go to the next slide, this brings things full circle of what can you expect to draw from. And it really comes back to the foundation that you've established, starting with your accumulation years and moving into distribution. So the current or anticipated future income, we put Social Security at the top because I think everybody knows that that is, we've paid into it, we're expecting it. There's some nerves that go along with it of, is it actually going to be available? But in some form or fashion, where does Social Security fit in? And then if you look down that list, for a lot of people, the rest of the items on the list are not guaranteed or it's not even available to them. So you quickly switch over to the right-hand column of common assets that you have control of and have to fill the gap between Social Security. And so if you look down that, it's all been in your own hands to create those assets. And so as we go into distribution and using all of the work that you have done through the early years, you hope that this bucket on the right-hand side is sufficient enough to allow you to maintain your lifestyle, potentially even up it, as Ellie described in the go-go years, but be able to satisfy both your go-go years, your no-go years, and your slow-go years, all of them, that you can meet what you're looking for in each one of those phases. And so if you flip to the next screen, we like to give you some just basic numbers or something to latch onto as we wrap this up. This is a very basic, not taking everything into consideration, such as taxes, such as inflation, but some numbers that you could scratch on the back of an envelope. So imagine a client wants a yearly income of 60,000 after they retire. They can expect 20,000 from Social Security. So again, if you were looking at that last screen, that left-hand column, what you can guarantee. And then we have to figure out what that gap is and where it's going to come from. And so in this example, you do the 60,000 of retirement income that's needed minus the 20 that you can expect from Social Security, which gives you a shortfall of 40,000. The next phase of this calculation then is taking it by a factor of 20 or 25 to give you a range of what that pot of money or that bucket of money should look like for you. 20 to 25 represents a couple different things. It could be longevity or time in retirement, but it also allows us to look at the yearly or the retirement income goal yearly, and then base it on a withdrawal rate of 4 to 5%. So again, this is not taking into consideration any of the sophisticated software that ties in a lot of other conversations, but it should give you a ballpark of what the number might look like if you wanted to maintain that desired retirement income of 60,000. And this is the activity I did most recently when I used that example of my client who has been more conservative, and we've had to have a real conversation about, it's not just an annual shortfall, but it is an overall retirement savings shortfall. And how are we going to start making that up, even though we're closer to the end of her working years? And so with that in mind, hopefully it gives you something that you too can scratch on the back of an envelope if this is something that's on your mind right now. So Ellie, if you want to wrap up the conversation that we've had, and then we can give them a few things that we have on the calendar coming.
I really like the math that you had laid out in that previous slide, Nikki, because it makes it so tangible for people to understand. But what I like to stress to a lot of clients is like it is so simple that there are so many more things that we need to add into those numbers that we don't directly show our clients because it's not necessarily fun. And so knowing that every person is unique, we really need to build a custom savings and investment roadmap for their needs, for their lifestyle goals and wants, and building that personalized wealth strategy along with a tax optimization review. So we offer that as a session here at Paladin to analyze your current accumulation foundation to see if you are sitting in a correct space, or if you need to be making some revisions to make sure that you are optimizing your dollar and making sure you're not losing your money to micro mistakes that you were making over time. And ultimately making sure that you have this long-term retirement plan set for yourself for that distribution phase. So if, heaven forbid, 2008 happens all over again and your 401k is cut in half, it doesn't really matter because we set you up correctly where you can just retire and it's going to be okay.
So Ellie, as we wrap up here, I think just to hopefully bring some, some conclusion to things is we started with, if you aren't thinking about your finances from a much broader perspective of incorporating vision that puts you in other areas of your life. And again, I've said it a few times, but I'll say it again. It could be where Ellie just ended there of being able to retire early when it wasn't expected. It might be opening that donut shop, or it might be having the Tahoe condo or home, or whatever it might be for you. It starts with a vision, and it starts with a really specific vision. And we tie that back to the concept of SMART goals being very specific, measurable, and so forth. There's a lot of things that we talked about in the accumulation phase, and we did make it fairly simple. But I think the thing that Ellie and I've tried to emphasize the most is, even if you are in the early phase or mid phase of accumulation or bumping up against retirement, there is a lot of foundation work that takes place much earlier than some may expect. And there's a lot of pieces that go into that, not just the simplicity that I gave you of the back of the envelope calculation. And we recognize that it gets even more complicated as you move into those retirement years. The number of options grow significantly, and it's really important that you put a plan in place and pull in the appropriate professionals to support you through those phases and as you're preparing for them. So again, the team here at Paladin Financial would love the opportunity to work with you if you had an aha moment along the way here and said, that's me, or if there's something that you're already working with us and you say, I didn't think about it from that perspective. Pick up the phone and call us at 651-842-8406, or go out to our website at paladinfinancial.com, and in the top right-hand corner, click the booking link and spend 15 minutes with one of our advisors on what's on your mind that maybe prompted you in this presentation that we gave you today. And we always like to see you. And so as we wrap things up here, we have several events that are on the calendar coming up. The one that we look most forward to every year is our Brews and Scoops event at Forgotten Star Brewery. So Nelson's Ice Cream from Stillwater, which is always a hit. Forgotten Star Brewery is a fantastic location with great beverages along the way. But this year we're adding another element to it, and we're adding music bingo. It's hosted by one of my dear friends, and it is an absolute blast. And so we would say, if you're going to see us just one time this year outside of your normal financial meetings, this is the one that you want to be a part of. And so look at your email, look at our website. We'll be communicating everything to you very soon, but at least mark your calendars for Monday, June 8th from 4 to 7 p.m.
I'm excited, Nikki. This is going to be a good one.
Well, anything else, Ellie, that you want to bring to conclusion here as we wrap up our second quarter of 2026 webinar?
You know what? You did such a fantastic job going through all of these examples that we had built out together and talking through scenarios, and also just relaying to our listeners that they know that they can always book appointments with us online. We are fully accessible. You know where to find us. You can always give us a call, like Nikki had said. And I very much pride ourselves in our events that we have quarterly, just about, right? And we love seeing our clients face to face and having them bring friends and family around for us to meet their network as well.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks for sharing the screen with me here, Ellie, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar.